Welcome to Polaris Live. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmiri, thanking you for joining today's conversation in this series of programs on the US China relationship and its global impact as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user supported channel brought to you live in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. You can also listen to these programs as podcasts on just about any podcast platform. And we hope in the next month and a half that we will also make Polaris-Live.com interviews available as a radio broadcast. So I'm your host, Sarwar Kashmiri. My guest today is Professor Jeremy Paltiel, Associate Professor of Political Science at Carleton University, Canada. He's the author of several chapters included in edited volumes, and his published articles have appeared in the China Quarterly and Asian Affairs. Welcome to Polaris Live, Dr. Paltiel.
Thank you. Just a small correction. I am actually a full professor, and I'm now retired, so I'm Professor Emeritus.
Professor Emeritus, and my deep apologies for demoting you. I shall make the corrections in our files. So, Jeremy, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Washington 2 days ago to open trade tariff negotiations with President Trump. What did he accomplish?
He accomplished showing up. You know, that's what Woody Allen said. Half of life is just showing up. He was there. He managed to have a cordial meeting with Mr. Trump, which is itself an accomplishment, and to basically open on a positive note something which will be a very difficult situation. And to be fair, he was the first global leader to begin any kind of formal negotiation after so-called Liberation Day. So so he accomplished the two things by being there.
I guess we do need to say that's what the accomplishment was, but I'm sure there's more to come. But I mean, realistically, did he even have a chance? As the US president says, we don't need Canada to make cars. We don't need Canada for their energy. We don't need their lumber, on and on and on. So it sounds as though America doesn't need Canada at all. To which you say?
Well, I think that's not entirely true. And I think Mr. Carney, I mean, here you have, on one side, you have a leader who does his homework and has prepared, and one who just deals from the top and has his obsessions. And so I think Mr. Carney was prepared, and what he wanted was to basically open a channel of communication and to put things on the table. And the most important thing, which was emphasized before, is that we already have a deal. There's a signed deal that Mr. Trump himself signed in his first term.
Yes. And you're talking
Americans
about
call it USMCA, we call it
USMCA. Thank you.
And basically, that's the Canadian bottom line, is that there is already a deal on the table. If the United States side wants to revise it, it has to come through negotiation. And that's the basic position of Canada. We were prepared to do something else, actually, and which it doesn't seem was taken up from the American side. But I think what Mr. Carney said he wanted to accomplish in Washington is to reach a comprehensive deal involving both trade and security, in which essentially Canada would be bartering heightened investment in security, in North American security, NATO security, in order to assure access to the U.S. market. But it seems like Mr. Trump didn't bite on that. And that still will be coming down the line. But that's the direction that Canada seems to be taking.
Well, I was in New York when Mr. Carney came to visit Mr. Trump in Washington. And I heard a lot of people say very admiringly of Canada's Prime Minister that the one remark he made when Mr. Trump was going on about Canada as the 51st state was that, I'm paraphrasing, I think, that he told Mr. Trump that you're a real estate man. And as you know, there are certain things like Buckingham Palace and the White House that are not for sale, and you should add Canada to it, which a lot of people spoke very admiringly about. But Jeremy, what is the best you think Canadians can expect in negotiations with the U.S.? I mean, after all, 70% of Canada's exports head to America.
I think, I think one of the important goals will be to at least safeguard the auto industry to the furthest extent possible. That means at least that the parts trade will be there, and to leave some room for assembly plants in Canada to be able to export in the United States. I think that's going to be difficult. I saw that the Great Britain reached a deal, at least tentative deal with the United States, in which they will still be subject to a 10% tariff. That in itself could probably wipe out most of the assembly plants in Canada exporting to the United States, because given the nature of that. But of course, we have an inside negotiator on that one, and that is the big three automakers themselves, who have their investments in Canada and don't want to see them go to waste. So that's probably where Canada will be headed, to try and lobby from within.
But Jeremy, the question I had was, if it is really true that America doesn't need Canada to make cars, I mean, how did all this get started in the first place?
Well, it got started a long time ago. I mean, Canada used to have high tariffs on American cars.
Right.
We had a protectionist thing. In 1965, we reached what was called an Auto Pact, in which a limited free trade was done, so that basically free trade was started on the basis of Canada would protect up to the amount of cars that were already being sold in Canada. At that point, there were relatively few overseas imports. Volkswagens, the Japanese hadn't yet come in, I think, and there are a few European imports. And so basically the entire Canadian market was made up by U.S. automobile makers. And Americans do not know, but Buick was originally a Canadian brand. McLaughlin, in Oshawa, where the General Motors plant was, that's where Mr. McLaughlin had his buggy factory, and he started producing outfits. So General Motors was also merged with McLaughlin to create that. So I mean, there is a long history there of shared production, which goes back 100 years or more. And so Mr. Trump may not be aware of that, but Canadians are aware of that. And they would like to. Now, there may be technological reasons why our automobile industry is doomed, because of the rise of EVs and the fact that China has pulled ahead in EV technology, which would be, and that will be a difficult problem. So it may be, in fact, a question of how to safeguard our manufacturing sector in an industry which is already in decline, and that's probably what will have to happen.
Well, much to discuss there, but Canada's foreign minister said yesterday that Canada has been over-reliant on the U.S. for too long and needs to forge closer ties with the UK and EU. But let me expand that a bit beyond what she said, which is that it seems to me that that this is an opportunity to expand ties with with China and also with the ASEAN countries, the 10 countries that form the Asian trading bloc. So these are all opportunities, right, Jeremy, you think, or are they really far in the distance?
Look, Canada does need to diversify its trade. And the interesting thing is that our free trade agreement with the United States was originally premised on the idea that making our industry more competitive through exposing it to U.S. competition might make it more competitive globally. That didn't work out that way. They became more embedded in supply chains in North America. However, the problem with some of these other markets is that some of the goods can't be traded there. I mean, China's not going to start buying Canadian produced automobiles. So that industry, the things that we sell to the United States may not be easily sold in other markets. Some things, commodities, yes, agricultural products, those things can certainly be sold in other markets. But the high value added ones, which are tied to North American production chains, are the ones that are most critical to us. And it's hard to see how it will be easily tied into other ones, perhaps into some European ones, and perhaps in areas of, I hasten to, perhaps things that, if we are going to invest more in security, things like munitions and armaments and high value added in aircraft, aerospace,
Right.
all those things, if we have opportunities to expand, but those are unlikely to be brought into production chains in Asia, and certainly not with China. So there's the security angle of in the high value added and high technology area, which makes it difficult to divert trade into other markets. Some trade can be diverted and will be diverted and has been diverted. But other trade, in the high value added one, we are in some ways, if we can't reach an agreement with the Europeans on some of those things, because the Europeans also are jealous to maintain their high value added manufacturing.
Yes.
And if we can't reach in America, we're in a difficult spot. So that's the areas. In certain kinds of commodities, we can divert trade. We need to diversify trade. We will end up in certain areas cooperating more with Asian countries. I don't know if you saw this but the South Koreans have just come up with a huge proposal to share arms manufacturing and build submarines for Canada.
Really?
But not just submarines, but also other armored vehicles and other things in which they would have some production and maintenance facilities in Canada. So there are those kinds of forces that will come up, but whether these will be in some ways new investments rather than ones that will be using up the trade capacity that already exists.
Now, this may be a little bit of an outsider, the question that Mr. Trump makes the point that America spent billions of dollars in keeping Canada safe under the American umbrella. So what I want to ask you is, if you were to look around Canada's borders, who would you classify as the prime candidate for acquiring the high level of American security?
The high level
of security that Mr. Trump believes Canada needs.
Where we're focused on,
yes,
the most important question is the Arctic. China has made known its interest in the Arctic. Russia is in the Arctic, and Canada has a very large footprint in the Arctic. And so that is the area where, to some extent, the United States needs cooperation from Canada.
Right.
And that is where we're going to invest. We already have had an agreement with Finland and the United States on building icebreakers and technology sharing. Missile defense and air defense for the entire continent has to come in the Arctic. So I think there are areas of cooperation which Canada has already focused on as part of our defense plan.
Right.
So we will invest more in that. And that, I mean, is an area which the United States should be interested in. Um, as long as China is interested in the Arctic and Russia's just over the horizon, there will be an issue there, and Canada has a role to play.
Well, it's really interesting about the Arctic because that really is the new frontier. Unfortunately, as I understand it, America has a couple of icebreakers. We've really been deficient in that. So your point about needing to cooperate with China has a great deal of realism in it. Jeremy, let me take a moment to remind viewers that Polaris-Live is a commercial-free, entirely viewer-supported channel. So we'd appreciate you signing up to our mailing list at kashmiri.com and to our YouTube channel, which is at www.polaris-live.com. There's no cost, but it really helps us. And of course, we always welcome your comments on our video and podcast channels. I want to talk about NATO, but I have another trade-related question for you, Professor Paltiel. The Economist newspaper called the imposition of reciprocal tariffs the most profound, harmful, and unnecessary economic error in the modern era. Do you agree?
Yes, because it upset expectations. It changed the whole pattern of trade. We've been moving towards greater globalization now for actually since the signing of the GATT in 1948, but especially accelerated after the end of the Cold War. And certainly Mr. Trump and many people who support him, including some economists, agree that that took a wrong direction in some sense. And so they're determined to reverse it. But the problem is the United States is a big country with population of well over 300 million. Canada has a population of about 40 million. We can't afford not to trade. We can't be self-sufficient. And if self-sufficiency, if protectionism was the best way to develop your economy, then North Korea should be the most highly developed country in the world. I don't think we want to emulate North Korea in any way. And so trade is inevitable, and and I think that as one economist put it, a closed economy is a backward economy. And of course, this will rebound on the United States as well, but it will take a while for the effects to be seen. But in the case of smaller countries, Canada is not a small country; it's a middle-sized country, but it's middle enough that it can't afford not to trade.
No, I follow you, and so. Here's a related question, and we may not have an answer to this right now. Is America's done quite a wonderful job in starting to cast away and cut all the ties that bind it to its closest allies. And some of this has to do with what a lot of people think, Jeremy, is Mr. Trump has an idea of America and the rest of the world, and it's different from what used to be since the Second World War. And he's bent on single-handedly changing America to fit into his concept of the world. And he's proceeding, it seems, at a very rapid rate. Do you think one person can really change a country's setting that has existed for so long, some of its culture, its geopolitics? I just want you to, with your background, I would love for you to just think about that a moment and tell me.
Let me just quote the American Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Besant. He already called the tariffs against China unsustainable. So there's no question that the United States itself cannot afford to this wrenching change in the short run. And in the long run, it's probably bad for the United States as well. Now, Mr. Trump harkens back to a period before the First World War, before 1913, which he sees as the United States golden age. But he has entirely mistaken America's place in the world at that time. The United States was still expanding across its continent and integrating huge amounts of immigrants into a growing country at that time. So it was closed, but growing at the same time. It was opening up internally, even if it was somewhat more protectionist externally. But that's not the case today. And so to go back to that as a golden era doesn't make sense from any economic point of view. Nonetheless, we are going to see some reversal of the globalization, which already had begun. It was predicted after the 2008 financial crisis. And that's going to be a wrenching change for everyone. And part of that, yes, was induced by the rise of China, which, as far as Chinese are concerned, see as the return of China to its global position that it occupied for most of the last 2,000 years. But for modern people in the West, this is seen as something which is relatively new. And China, of course, has taken up much of the world's manufacturing, which has had an impact on the United States and in other industrialized countries. And now people in many countries are beginning to wonder about that. And it has caused problems in democracy after democracy and led to the rise of right-wing forces there as the skilled working class has seen its fortunes decline in country after country.
Wise words. Related to that question, I have something here I'd written down not long before we went on this interview, and that is that Canadians of all people, if I may use the word, have been very hurt at the position that China has taken, and what I want to ask you is, assuming all of this gets reversed, the new administration comes in, do you think that the level of trust that was there before will exist again at the throw of a switch?
You know, there's an old epigram from a Roman philosopher. It goes, "Trust once it leaves never returns once it came." Trust once it goes never returns whence it came. So it's very hard to rebuild trust. And in the same way, and we could talk about the same thing that's happening, institutions are hard to build, easy to destroy. So we are going through a wrenching change, and the world will not look the same in a few years' time. It'll be hard to rebuild in the same way that it was. Now, not everything is due to Trump. Some of these changes were happening anyhow.
Right.
But he has accelerated them in a way that made it much more difficult to manage, and also created a lightning rod, and to center the anger on the United States itself, which is also means that the United States' position worldwide is becoming more tenuous. I just read today that Joseph Nye, the man who invented the term soft power,
yes,
just passed away.
Yes.
And it's a fitting moment for him to pass away because America's soft power has dissipated at the same time.
What a fascinating observation. What a fascinating observation. I want to take advantage of your deep thinking that you've done over the years. A long time ago, when America had barely become a country, France sent over two of their best intellectuals to go find out what this country was all about. And they wrote their report in the form of a 2-volume book, which I know you're familiar with, called Democracy in America.
Yeah, so, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Yes. De Tocqueville, yes. And I read it some years ago, and I still remember a line from it. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. When he talked about the presidency, the American presidency to the French people, he said, the Americans have given more power to their president than all the emperors in Europe. It's just that they don't know it yet. Yeah. And I'm reminded of that in the last few months of what de Tocqueville wrote. And I just wonder whether you see any connection there. Do you think it's...
There's an irony in that.
Mm.
The irony is that what has emerged over the last few months since the inauguration is what the American Constitution was supposedly designed to prevent. With the separation of powers.
Wow.
And countervailing powers inside Congress. And this is an astonishing development, which, it's very difficult for American political thinkers to wrap their head around, because for decades, for centuries really, they have been telling us that by design, the American Constitution was working to prevent a single center of power. So this is deeply ironic and, of course, deeply disturbing. And, obviously there are reasons for why and how it has taken place. And so So there are two senses, really, in which America is losing its soft power. The United States was the world's first constitutional republic.
Yes.
And for most of the last 250 years, it has prided itself on being the epitome of a constitutional republic. Essentially, Americans believed that, the American Constitution was the equivalent of the Bible. It had a kind of evangelical fact to it.
Yes.
But it's not just that the operation of the United States, this whole constitutional project is now being called into doubt by the way in which an authoritarian presidency, a vindictive presidency, and a culture of politics in which inflicts cruelty on innocent people has taken power. And that's, of course, it's no source of joy for Canadians. Canadians have always prided themselves on not being. We are the first counter-revolutionaries, after all. We were founded by those who refused to join the American Republic, and we've felt more secure under the so-called rights of Englishmen.
Yes.
But at the same time, we've always been close observers of the United States. They were our friends, and we admired much about the United States. So this kind of betrayal, and our Prime Minister called it a betrayal, runs very deep in our psyche.
Yeah. Well, I still have 3 or 4 more questions, so you're just going to have to come back, Professor Paltiel. That's all I can say. We'll have to leave it at that, unfortunately. But it has been a real pleasure talking with you. And we are living through, as the Chinese would say, interesting times. Or I don't think I can quote Dickens anymore, that these are the best of times and the worst of times. It just seems to be the worst of times so far anyway. So I want to thank you very much for coming and letting me bounce these questions with unknown answers to you. But you're the only person I know who could answer them, so I didn't.
Well, I don't think
about that. So thank you again, and
thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
And I also want to thank our viewers from around the world for joining us for yet another program. We will continue this program series focusing a little more than we have on the countries of ASEAN, the Association of East Asia Nations, and China, and also the countries of the Global South. So join us as frequently as you can. Sign up under kashmiri.com to get the Polaris alert. And until later, goodbye.